What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Commentary for you. Jimmy Smith, Ryan Moody. A little bit later than normal, but we're here. UFC 246. I forget who's the main event. Oh, that's right. Conor McGregor and Cowboy Cerrone. But we're here to talk about the whole card. We're going to, well, not the whole card, the main card. You guys know how we are by now. We are going to start in the lightweight division. Anthony Pettis versus Carlos Diego Ferreira. Pettis, man, I tell you, if you just go off his win one, lose one momentum, then I think he's got this one in the bag. But, you know, the reality is great kicks, great spinning kicks, Superman punches, jumping guillotine. I don't know that he wants to go to the ground here with Ferreira, but he is known for those jumping guillotines, you name it. However, I think Ferreira is just as versatile. I mean, great knees. But even though I would give the ground advantage to Ferreira, I do believe Anthony Pettis is just going to be a little bit too much on his feet and get a win here. I really feel that's going to happen strongly. I usually look at fights and I don't get a real distinct, feeling for them. And I kind of weigh my pros and cons. A couple of the fights on this card, Jimmy, I feel 100% about. Don't use that as any betting advice because I'm not a professional, but I would really be surprised if some of these fights go the other way.
Yeah, that's how it feels to me too. It really does. You have to make a concerted effort a lot of times to kind of really get those matchups where the stakes are even and you get that real competitive fight. Now, we don't know how the card's going to turn out, but one of the criticisms of this card is it feels very kind of last minute. And Dana White said January is usually slow for us. And if you look at the card, it was probably, Conor wants to fight January 18th. Who's available right now? It's just after the holidays. Cutting's not easy. Some people aren't in town. Some people have plans. So I think they had a pretty shallow pool of people to deal with. This fight was announced right before Thanksgiving. It's not a lot of lead time. So when situations like that occur, generally speaking, from the having been in it to some degree, you get the fights that are a little more lopsided because, you can't balance them that well because it's just who's available. In this particular case, Anthony Pettis, Diego Ferreira, I think it's one of those things where Ferreira brings like a pressure style most of the time. Walks forward, throws good hands. Where I think he's in over his head a little bit with Anthony Pettis is in his last fight against Taisumov, Ferreira walked into some counterpunches in the first round. He just has the kind of style you can counter. He walks forward, not a ton of head movement, not the slickest attack in the world. He wears guys down. Pettis is a very good counterpuncher. He's a bit slick, very good body kick. As you said, the spinning stuff, there's a lot of stuff that you just don't see coming quite easily. And one thing about Pettis, he's had his ups and downs. Literally win one, lose one for his last few fights, but they've been top names. He hasn't had that step down performance against the guy you've never heard of. All of his losses in the UFC have been top shelf. Will he stumble in this one? Maybe, but I would bet no. I think Pettis catches him with a counter shot, and I think it's probably in the first 2 rounds. I think just tactically, Ferreira's in a little bit over his head, but some fans, when I was talking about this fight earlier, think I'm sleeping on Ferreira. There's a lot more than we've seen in the last couple fights. Maybe that's the case, but I'm still going with Pettis.
Jimmy, everyone will tell you that Alexa Grasso and Claudia Gadelha are pulled off this card. I want to take it in a little bit different direction before we get into, boom, Brian Kelleher and Odie Osborne. I find it interesting. I really had this fight circled anyway. I thought this was going to be a really, really good fight, and we will discuss that. But I was really intrigued that they left Roxanne Modafferi and Macy Barber on the prelim card. Now, I know your counter argument will be, well, they're just trying to get Macy Barber more exposure. But if they were going to pull, their next star power, right, and put it on the main card, I don't know how many casual fans, which probably zero are listening to this, would pull Odie Osborne, who I think has it, just to give a little preview of the fight, over Macy Barber. I was a little bit intrigued at their match pull-up.
Surprised me a lot as well. I really thought it would be probably Andre Fili and Sodiq Yusuff. That's going to be a good one. If you don't know Andre Fili, good outside striker, a lot of versatility. I like how he fights at range. And Sodiq Yusuff, 10-1, move forward, a lot of power punches. I think it's going to be a striker's delight, and both guys are well-rounded and really, really hungry. Haqparast versus Dober, I think that's a great one, too. I was surprised they picked this one.
Super Sadiq, right down the road from me, buddy, actually. So, we'll talk about this fight between Brian Kelleher, who, by the way, great YouTube channel. I love fighters that have YouTube channels. I've gotten back and forth with Brian a couple times. Great guy. And Odie Osborne. You know, here's the thing. Odie Osborne, if you watch him, he's got it. I don't know what it is, but he has it. If it is an 8-inch reach advantage at his height, that's it. Early finisher, making his UFC debut, technically. But you go back and watch his Contender Series fight. Man, this guy has great fight IQ. I mean, incredible fight IQ. Probably shows when you looked at Brian Kelleher, who's got, a UFC veteran record at this point, is actually the underdog in the fight against the guy making his debut. To me, man, I think there's too much here against Brian Kelleher, as much as I hate to say it. One thing that really worries me about Kelleher is he went into a war, a one-sided war, with all due respect, against John Lineker, and I don't know that he's been the same after that fight. I watched the Montel Jordan fight. He went down on an elbow before he got submitted, and I'm telling you, he would have walked through this elbow just about any fight prior to the John Lineker fight, and it just seems like, you know how sometimes we talk about a fighter just goes through an all-out war and they come out the other side different and you don't know it until you see it? I worry that Brian Kelleher is different after that fight. And listen, he's got a tall task here, but if anyone is going to beat Odie Osborne just standing and throwing, it's going to be Brian Kelleher.
I called that fight. It was on the Nunes-Pennington fight card, and you're right. It was an absolute savage war. And I call them crossroads fights, where they're never that guy again. There are some famous ones. Tyson Douglas, probably one of the more famous ones of all time. But you look at the fights before and the fights after, and it's a different person. Here's one clue to this fight. And you say Odie has that thing, has that it factor. What can the UFC get more out of? A guy who's 19-10, 2-3 in his last 5 fights, or a guy who is 8-2, coming off a first-round submission in Dana White's Contender Series, the guy who has finished his last 4 opponents, making his UFC debut. Who are they going to get more out of? Odie, for sure. So putting this fight together, is it the tough veteran that'll give this guy a challenge and see if he's ready for the UFC? Or is it a showcase for the guy coming in? Right now, on paper, to me, it's a showcase for the guy coming in. Does it always work out that way? No. Things happen. It's the fight world. You never know. Kelleher's a tough dude. But the way this is set up to me, and what I know about these guys' styles, Osborne just has the advantage in this one. I think this is set up, as you said, a guy's going to stand and brawl and bang. It's going to look good when Odie throws a combination that finishes him. That's what the matchmakers, that's what UFC is thinking. And I think they're thinking the right way.
Moving up the card, heavyweight, Alexei Oleinik, Maurice Green. The great thing with this fight is I think there's a real stylistic contrast in a way. When I look at Maurice Green, guy has great uppercuts. When I look at Oleinik, he really works hard to close that range, get to the ground game where you've talked about. The guy is absolutely a weapon. But I feel like there's a little bit of a mismatch right there where if Oleinik is going to go in too fast and Maurice can catch him with an uppercut, I honestly think this could end the fight. Now, no shame to Oleinik. I mean, he's just coming off 2 losses against absolute monsters. And, add him to the list of people that have been knocked out by Overeem and Harris. I have to see how he responds. And part of me wonders if he's not going to respond. We kind of just talked about this negatively against Green with those really good uppercuts. And I think that's going to be the difference in this fight.
I'm going with Oleinik because not just his submission game, his willingness to use that submission game from positions most heavyweights don't use them. Very few heavyweights in the history of MMA, and I mean this sincerely, have a dangerous guard or a dangerous, tricky submission game where they don't have to be on top of you in dominant position. Minotauro had a hell of a guard. Fedor had a hell of a guard. Verdum, a hell of a guard. Mir was good. Not a lot. Not a lot. What Oleinik brings is he'll go for stuff from half guard and butterfly, these weird positions that heavyweights generally don't use. They don't do that. He always goes for this funky Nogi Ezekiel choke. He goes for that in every position. And if you're Maurice Green, a comparatively inexperienced heavyweight, only 8-3, he just hasn't seen that many ground games. He hasn't seen very many fighters that'll go for this weird stuff. He'll roll for such stuff and pull guard and all this stuff other heavyweights don't do. You can drill the, single leg defense and double leg defense all day long. When somebody pulls guard and gets in these funky positions that you're not used to because you're a 6'7" heavyweight and people usually don't do that to you, those are the kinds of things Oleinik does. And I think he's just a bit too unorthodox on the ground for someone who doesn't have a whole lot of fight experience. I think that's going to be the difference.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. It's you can't bring somebody in to a camp to replicate what Oleinik does. My fear about this fight is that you've got a guy that's coming in off 2 losses, and he's going to want to go to that strength. He's going to want to get aggressively Maurice Green down to the ground, and I think that just plays way too well into what is honestly one of Maurice Green's biggest strength, which is that uppercut. Don't get me wrong. If Oleinik can suffocate him and get him down on the ground, this fight is over before we can say, I think it's over. But I just think there's that one little detail that is going to be Maurice Green's ace in the hole versus Alexei Oleinik's, I guess, emergency standby. And I have this weird feeling that those two dynamics are going to meet right in the middle. And we're going to see if Oleinik, at least if nothing else, we're going to see if Oleinik's chin can still stand up.
We will, but we'll also see if Maurice Green can handle some really funky ground attacks. And I think Oleinik comes out on top.
The rematch that no one, I don't want to say nobody asked for.
Yeah.
Yeah. The rematch that we've all been clamoring for and waited for bated breath is finally here. Raquel Pennington, Holly Holm, split the last time. And, when I went back and looked at this fight, I watched it, and I don't know that I saw the fight as a split. I personally gave it to Holly, but
so did I.
I've kind of looked at it, and I've thought to myself, beyond this fight, okay, taking what I saw there, this was a fun one to go back and watch fights for, by the way, with Cowboy and Osborne, but moving and Pettis. So this was a fun one to research. However, to go past that, I looked at, who's improved more since that fight. And honestly, I feel like Raquel has. But when we just talked about, Oleinik and Green, kind of the one tangible that worries me, Raquel Pennington has this propensity to be overly aggressive and push a fight and pursue a fighter at a time where the fight's really not over. Like, that's a good thing to do. We talk a lot about instincts trying to close a fight. And Raquel almost does that, but at times the fight's not in an ending sequence, if you will. And my fear is if she's going to begin to continue to chase Holly around, she's going to get pieced up. She's going to get in a situation where she's reaching, she's trailing. Holly Holm is not the fighter you want to do that against. She's still an elite boxer, okay? Set her losses aside. Set her disappointment after Ronda Rousey's win aside. She's still a good boxer at her core. That's what she always was. And I honestly see this being a little bit of a laborious fight where Holly is just going to point out a win over Raquel.
I've said it consistently. Holly Holm, to me, was thrust into the limelight by her knockout of Ronda Rousey, but she just hasn't beaten elite fighters. A lot of opportunities. The fights have been close. They've been decisions for the most part. But she's lost to the best of her generation. And 4 title shots in 2 different weight classes, I believe, from adding them all up. Title fights, period. And Holly Holm's problem is against the elite of the elite, she loses. But I don't put Raquel Pennington in that category. She hasn't had the fight against non-elite talent and fallen flat. That hasn't happened yet. Of course, Betch Correia, Megan Anderson, fighters I don't put at the elite level. Those were her wins in the last UFC since the Ronda Rousey knockout. It's really about Pennington because, as you say, has she improved enough to get over the hump? Holly Holm is still big for the weight class. She's still technical. She's still fast. She's still versatile. When she's confident, she does well. I think she has enough to beat Pennington. Now, she talked about, I covered it this week on Sirius, was about I'm still going for gold and all this stuff. And I don't want to see her fight for another title because she's had her opportunities. She's fallen short against the best of the best. I don't want to see it happen again. I want to see some new blood in there. So I think Holly Holm wins. I guess it gets her back on track. I just don't see where she goes from that point because another title shot, I think Nunes beats her again. And it's kind of a wasteland at 45, but Nunes is a champ there too. So I think she gets past Pennington. Where she goes from there, I don't know.
It's 15:30 in the comment section for the person that wants to put Cowboy and Conor. I love the timestampers. However, look, man, we know what to expect from both of these guys. You know, you look at Donald, great kicks. Honestly, going back and rewatching this fight, I think his boxing's improved. Very good accuracy, timing. I think an underrated jab. His jab looks like it's gotten better every single fight from what I was watching. And he may give up the reach, but I think he is also going to be the larger fighter. I think the interesting aspect of this fight is going to be whether Donald deals with takedowns, considers using the kicks to set up takedowns. Conor, obviously, we know, left-hand power, precision, timing, fluid, mixes in body shots incredibly well. But I honestly, looking at both of these fighters, think speed is going to be the factor. More so if Cowboy starts slow and can't secure that takedown early on, if that's what he goes for. And I mentioned earlier in the show, I really feel like in looking at these fights, the MMA gods were speaking to me. I don't know. For some reason, I really feel like this is going to be Conor McGregor overwhelming Cowboy Cerrone. The speed, cumulative damage, probably just going to be a little bit too much. And I see this fight ending in the second or third round.
I would say it ends in the second, maybe the first. He's a very fast starter. And it comes down to who has the tangible advantages, who has the intangible advantages. The tangible advantages are tactically and stylistically. And tactically, fighters like Conor have always given Cowboy trouble. Slick, accurate, southpaws with speed, good footwork, good timing. If you stand and bang, bro, and you want to stay there and brawl, Cowboy can beat those guys 9 times out of 10, even at 170 pounds. But what happens? The slick, versatile, accurate, a lot of times southpaw strikers give him trouble. Also, big fights, big lights, that tends to give Cowboy problems. The one X factor that really isn't on Conor's side this time is, guys who get under his skin and kind of make it personal and that kind of throws him off. They were buddy-buddy at the press conference. I think that very much benefits Cowboy. But just too many factors in this fight favor Conor McGregor, where things might be different. If we get out of round 2, round 3, we might see a turning tide. And people have talked about Conor, quote, running out of gas. He doesn't necessarily run out of gas as much as his pacing. He needs to attack and then rest, and attack and then rest. I mean, there are people who have made their whole career attacking and then resting. It's slightly different than running out of gas. Cowboy, once he gets going, tends to wear fighters down and doesn't give them an opportunity to rest. If he gets past round 3 and can start putting it on Conor, we might see a different fight. But I'm going with, if I have to make a pick, Conor McGregor. Same thing, rounds 1 or 2.
We couldn't do worse if we did actually go over these beforehand and literally lay out what we were going to say.
We don't do that, just so you know. If we land on the same thing, it's because we do.
We don't. However, with that said, I literally have been so absent-minded, Jimmy. We've done like 4 or 5 shows since you got back, and it's failed to dawn on me that anyone that doesn't understand that this is just a port of our podcast over to YouTube. I failed to mention that we signed a 1-year agreement with our Podbean syndicate. They basically came to us and said, we're one of their biggest shows. They didn't want us to go anywhere, and we have a complete 1-year commitment from them. If, in fact, you were listening to this on iTunes or Podbean, don't ask me about Spotify. They don't love us. I don't know what the problem is. But if you're listening on YouTube, it also is available on all other, except Spotify, podcast formats. We appreciate you guys checking this out, even if it was a little late. We hope you enjoy the fights, and we will be back very shortly with more commentary.